I live in the real world, and I fight for the future. Many among us do. We fight for our country and for all of humanity and for the other species and for Gaia herself. We live in the real world. We fight for the future. All of the images included in the first of these 5 presentations were from tweets related to Russia's genocidal attack on the Ukraine. The images selected were all of women, women journalists, women in the military, civilian women casualties. Why? Because victory in this war is vital for the future of the West and of democracy, and because the leadership of women is vital for the future of all life on this planet. The images included in the second and the third presentation are also all of women, except for 2 slides, 2 or 3 slides. And the women whose images I share in these presentations are all agents of the ascendant feminine, whether in the United States or in the Ukraine or Belarus or Russia itself. I'm sure that when we come to the October presentation, it will include Iranian women as well. And also, of course, women of Africa. So yes, it's all one struggle, one great conflict, one shining portal to step through into a real future. These 5 talks are focused on this year's midterm election in the United States, the first of the 3 deadlines I outlined in Secret Engine of the World. These 3 deadlines are either doom-defying or doom-defining, depending upon the outcomes. And it is truly up to us. By us, I mean what I call in the United States the common front, the united front for sanity and decency, left, right, liberal, center, true conservative, ideologies aside, united for science, for human rights, for Gaia, for sanity and decency. The facts on the ground always begins with, of course, the overarching challenges of our time, in particular these planetary emergencies, the climate collapse and 6th great extinction, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, the big lie, 1/6 and beyond here in the United States, the war in the Ukraine, which I've mentioned, and the madness of removing all restrictions on the guns that men wield against the innocent in our country, and the imposition of cruel and inhuman restrictions on women, the reproductive rights of women. So these are the overarching challenges, the planetary emergency. I will, throughout this presentation, I'm going to quote tweets, I'm going to quote articles. The references, full links and full references to everything that I'm reading is in both these presentation slides and also in the text version that accompanies them on my blog, wordsofpower.earth. Right? So imagine all of England and Wales under 2 to 10 feet of water, more than half of the United Kingdom's population, without any livelihood or shelter. That's the scale of the Pakistan floods. This is happening now. It's not coming, it is here. It has been here now for a while. In regard to the pandemic, I've heard people say it's over. I've heard people say it's not over. The truth is, it's both over and not over. Both of these statements are true. I'll just leave you with this one. I'm not going to go into the pandemic much in this presentation, but I've said a lot about it over the past 2 or 3 years, but I will we'll quote this from Time magazine. They say long COVID is, quote, long COVID, this is something that's evolving now, appearing in people who have suffered COVID, seemingly gotten over it, and found out that they have a longer challenge, perhaps a lifetime challenge ahead of them. They say long COVID is, quote, the greatest mass disabling event in human history. I'll repeat that. Time magazine. They say long COVID is, quote, the greatest mass disabling event in human history. So I'm going to touch on two disturbing developments since the last update was in, I think maybe it was August 22nd, something like that. So in the last month, two disturbing developments as we head toward the hurdle toward the midterms I want to point out to you. And the first one is a infusion of $1.6 billion delivered to Leonard Leo to quote a new organization, quote nonprofit, unquote, run by Leonard Leo. Who is Leonard? Who gave him this money? A 90-year-old electronics company executive. He gave this $1.6 billion to Leonard Leo. Who is Leonard Leo? He was one of the directors of one of the heads of the Federalist Society, right? So he's been prominent in challenges to abortion rights, voting rights, climate change action. He pretty much financed the packing of the court with this radical, you can't even call them conservative, these radical right-wing court that we now have after Trump got to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices with the help of Jill Stein and Julian Assange and probably some of you. So what is Leonard Leo going to do with his $1.6 billion? Well, some of it's going to get infused into the Senate campaign between now and Election Day in November. So this is something to understand. He announced in early 2020 that he was stepping back from the Federalist Society to remake politics at every level. And we can see that now happening. All throughout the United States, people attempting to remake politics at every level, from the school board and the election board, all the way up to the lieutenant governor, the secretary of state and the governor, and the control of the House and the Senate and the presidency, and of course the courts. The other disturbing development in the last month as we hurtle towards the midterms is the fall of CNN and the fall of Politico.com. Now, listen, I don't hold CNN up as a bastion of great journalism. It's certainly not Politico. It's pretty much of a hack outfit anyway. But they were centrist, I would say. And now they're being and they indulge in way too much both-siderism as it is, and also in the framing, the horse race framing of, well, the Democrats say this, the Republicans say that, as if we're still living in that world. We never really did live in that world, but we were closer to that world. Where we are now is everyone sane versus the insane. And so politics as usual it doesn't exist. And so therefore journalism as usual, as formally normal cannot exist, right? But CNN is going now in the wrong direction. billionaire, another billionaire, John Malone. Who's John Malone? Well, he donated $250,000 to Trump's inauguration. So in other words, he just put $250,000 in the Trump family pockets. He also donated to Trump's Save America PAC, the purpose of which was to overturn the 2020 election. Now he controls CNN. And his new major domo says he's told the staff that they want to not call Trump's debunked stolen election claim the big lie anymore because the words sound like a Democratic slogan. Well, if I say the earth is round and I'm a Democrat, is the earth is round a Democratic slogan, or is it just a fact? The big lie is the factual description of what it is when you say that the election was stolen, the 2020 election was stolen from Trump. It's a big lie. And as soon as, now that Malone's in, we've seen the White House, longtime White House correspondent, John Harwood, a good man. Well, this was his sign off. Let's see if I can, I'll read you his sign off. He said, we're brought up to believe there's two different political parties with different points of view, and we don't take sides in honest disagreements between them. That's the way journalists were trained in the before time. But that's not what we are talking about. The Republican Party right now is led by a dishonest demagogue. And that was his last day at CNN. And also the anchor of the host of CNN Reliable Sources, which was our longest running show. His show was canceled, and he also left the building. So CNN is deeply compromised at this point. And then also Politico, it was taken over again. Obscenely rich industrialist, a German, atop Axel Springer 19th story headquarters, overlooking the demolished Berlin Wall. He's concerned that American press has become too polarized. And legacy brands like the New York Times and the Washington Post are drifting to the left. And in his view, conservative media has fallen under the sway of Trumpian alternative facts. Well, New York Times and the Washington Post, sometimes they get it wrong, sometimes they get it right, sometimes they engage in real reporting, sometimes they indulge in political cowardice. But they're not drifting to the left. And there is no equivalency between the New York Times and the Washington Post and Fox News and the right-wing echo chamber. There is no equivalency. That's a false equivalency. When anybody ever raises it to you, when anybody ever says MSNBC and Fox are the same, they're not. And if they're telling you that, they're deeply deluded, or they are trying to delude you. So these are disturbing developments because these two outlets frame a certain centrist. They seek to reflect and really are really framing the center, the political center, and by falling in this way to these industrialists, they are moving that center even farther to the right, and again propping up this false equivalency between the Democratic Party and what used to be the Republican Party. So these are troubling developments that we have to keep our eyes on, and hopefully their impact will not tilt the scales as we come toward the first deadline in the beginning of November. The good news is, I'll read you this tweet. The former President of the United States, this is from September 10th. The former President of the United States and the head of the GOP is under criminal investigation for espionage and sedition. That's not hyperbole. That's not exaggeration. That's hard, cold fact. The former President of the United States and the head of GOP is under criminal investigation for espionage and sedition. When I talked to you in August, Pence's two top aides had been brought in to testify to federal grand juries about what happened on January 6th and leading up to January 6th, the efforts to undermine and overthrow the transition of power in the United States. Undermine the election, undermine the results of the certified results of a legitimate election. So that was last month. This month, I can tell you that former White House counsel, Trump's former White House counsel, and Trump's former deputy White House counsel were subpoenaed by the federal grand jury and went in to testify about the events leading up to January 6th and the plots that were being hatched by Flynn and Stone and Trump and others. I'll read you another tweet. The first tweet in this section I read you was factual. This tweet is a assumption, a valid assumption based on the facts at hand. From Duty to Warn, around the same time as the tweet I read you in the beginning of this section about sedition and espionage. We predict when the damage assessment is complete, Trump's espionage will prove to be the most catastrophic breach of national security in U.S. history. It won't be about mere pilferage or possession. He passed secrets to the Russians from day one and to the Saudis shortly thereafter. Now, the President of the United States delivered a very important speech at the beginning of September on the threat, the grave threat, the existential threat to democracy and to the rule of law in the United States. He didn't mince words. He laid it out. You can find a link, an embedded link to the video of his full remarks and an excerpt from his speech. It's only about 20 minutes long. It's worth listening to. And the fact, Andrea Junker tweets, the fact that ABC, NBC, and CBS are all airing King Charles's first speech, but none of them aired President Biden's primetime speech about the ongoing threats to the American democracy shows exactly what is terribly wrong with today's political mainstream. But I'll give you some cogent analysis of this historic speech from David Rothkopf. The MAGA GOP will no doubt call Biden's speech divisive, but it was the opposite. He sought to unify the vast majority to stand up to the ugly, loud minority that is a threat to all we stand for. It's the kind of stand against fascism that FDR and Churchill once called for. Commentators portraying the coming election campaigns as political, as politics as usual, are failing as journalists. One side is trying to destroy democracy and strip away Americans' rights. The other side is trying to defend this country and its ideals. Both siding it is doing MAGA fascists' work. So that's something important. I want you to hold on to and to share with others. They love to talk about bipartisanship. They love to talk about nonpartisan. The great bipartisan movement in this country is the side fighting for democracy, which consists not only of the Democratic Party, a wholly unified Democratic Party, but also many people who said no, never to Trump. Many people, many people who said no, never to Trump, like the Lincoln Project and others, and many who came later and said, I just can't do this, and have and become leaders like Liz Cheney. And this grand united front, it stretches from AOC and Bernie Sanders to Liz Cheney and Stuart Stevens. We don't agree on anything, but we agree on these few things: on sanity and decency, on the rule of law, on the sanctity of the vote, and the peaceful transition of power. And this is where we make our stand. This is where we must stand. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful movement of humanity to be a part of, and patriotism to be a part of. I just want you to understand. 5538 found that 195 of 529 GOP nominees running for office in the midterms fully deny the 2022 election results. Another 61 raised questions about its legitimacy, and there was no answer from 115 candidates. Only 71 of them accepted the results fully. 87 accepted the results with reservations. This is madness, madness and cravenness and ruthlessness. Just be clear about that. And at the same time, since January 6th insurrection, the Republicans have launched a massive election subversion effort aimed at undermining the accurate counting of ballots and certification of election results throughout the country in every state. This is happening right now. 58% of respondents in a two-day poll after Biden's speech, including 1 in every 4 Republicans, understand this. They said Trump's Make America Great Again movement is threatening America's democratic foundations. This is our reality. This is why I say that the 2022 midterm elections is the first of 3 doom-defining deadlines for our country and for humanity. Now more leaning into the encouraging part of all of this. You know, Jennifer Rubin, the Washington Post columnist, a conservative, by the way, she points it out beautifully. She frames it beautifully. She says, if you deny women's autonomy as adult decision makers and subject them to increased risk of trauma, grave health complications, and death, they get mad. They get very mad. In August, I reported to you about what happened in Kansas when they tried to change the Constitution of Kansas to outlaw abortion. Well, that's happening all over the country. And let me just see if I can. Yeah, I'll just leave you with these numbers. Well, Tom Bonier, the CEO of Target Systems, a data polling firm, he says in his 28 years of analyzing election, he's never seen anything like this before. The Roe wave of new women voters, fired up by the Supreme Court's abortion decision, could swamp the GOP hopes in the midterms. It's us against Leonard Leo with his assist from CNN and Politico. And a report from Idaho. This is a report from Idaho. Idaho, not New York, not California, Idaho. Almost 60% of the new voters registered in Idaho since the Supreme Court decision are women. Time to reclaim our rights at the polls. Rovember. They're not voting to take away their daughters' rights, to take away their own rights. The women of Idaho. So as I've done last month, I've also done this month. I listed in the presentation, you'll see a survey of critical races: Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Georgia, Arizona, Texas, Florida. This is not at all to infer that these are the only critical races. These are just major races with electoral college implications and other ways in which they can profoundly affect the course of events between 2022 and 2024. But these races are all vital, and they're filled, these races are filled with horrific information about the candidates that have been put up by Trump and the zombie cult formerly known as the Republican Party. And also beautiful stories about the Democrats, the brave Democrats, men and women, people of color, running against them. And a lot of these races are close. We are ahead in some of these races. We are behind in a few of them. Things in a midterm that can look like it's going one way, and then at the end, you know, you're saying, what the hell happened? Where did it all evaporate? So even though it's getting closer, we're within 50 days now, we're 40-something days out, a lot can happen. But I encourage you to go to wordspower.earth and read through some of these stories. Michigan is ground zero for election fraud tactics. They are training them to be part of a vast GOP corruption scheme to wreck democracy, one stolen election at a time. I'm just reading you through a few. Unearthed audio shows Dr. Oz, that's the Republican candidate for senator in Pennsylvania, saying incest is, quote, not a big problem, unquote, as long as, quote, you're more than a first cousin away, unquote. He added his daughters don't want to have sex with him because, quote, my daughters hate my smell. My daughters hate my smell. Girls don't like their father's smell, unquote. This is the Republican candidate for the United States Senate from the state of Pennsylvania. Yes, he's behind John Fetterman. God bless John Fetterman, but we can't take anything for granted. I won't even go into Mastriano, the gubernatorial candidate, but it's all it's all again in the text accompanying this presentation on wordspower.earth. Wisconsin race, I just want to say about there's so much I could say about Senator Ron Johnson, who's the incumbent Republican who Mandela Barnes, a wonderful young man, is running against in Wisconsin and doing very well. But all I want to say about Ron Johnson is I want to read you the definition from the Oxford Languages, the Oxford Dictionary. Fifth column, a group within a country at war who are sympathetic to or working for its enemies. And then the example I have added, for example, Senator Ron Johnson, Republican, Wisconsin, is a fifth columnist. In Georgia, listen to these numbers. In Georgia, from Narrow, 62% of mail-in ballots requests are for likely Democrats. 60% plus of ballot requests are from women. 30% of ballot requests are from Black voters, up 11% from 2018. 44,000 Black Georgians have requested ballots, 4 times more than from 2018. We know where they will stand when they vote and how their votes will go if they're counted. In Arizona, again, go ahead and read some of these horror stories, but this progressive statistician pollster sums it up. The only way to protect Arizona women from the Republican Party's cruel and inhuman abortion regime is to beat Kari Lake. Texas, Florida, it's all here. Let me read you numbers out of Florida too, and then that'll be in Florida, new voter registrants in Florida since January 1st of 2022. From January 1st until the leak of the rollback of Roe v. Wade, it was plus 1.7% men. After the leak of the Supreme Court opinion, the Supreme Court ruling rolling back Roe v. Wade, until its release, it was down to plus 0.4 men. Since the ruling was released, ending the protections under Roe v. Wade, plus 5.5% women. That's new voter registrants in the state of Florida since the end of Roe, plus 5.5%. Now I joke with people because for all during in 2015, 2016, 2017, people ask how we're doing, how it's going, and I would say in terms of the resistance to Trump and McConnell and what they were doing to this country, and I would say, well, we're doing very well, so we're all in great danger. We're doing very well, so we're all in great danger. In other words, they're getting desperate. Well, I still feel I would say I'm wildly optimistic. Let's say I was wildly optimistic. We're doing quite well, so we're all in great danger. I said I was wildly optimistic, but now after 4 years of Trump, after the pandemic, after the abomination of January 6th and everything that has happened since, it just doesn't feel right to say I'm wildly optimistic, even though the underlying fundamentals that make me wildly optimistic are the same. So this election season, I'm just saying I'm grimly confident. I'm grimly confident. The polls are encouraging. The GQP is devouring itself. When the voters are turned off by their toxic extremist agenda. The demographic shift in the US body politic, which I've described before, and the evolutionary arc of the human race continue to be aligned in this portal that we're moving through, that we're attempting to move through. I am grimly confident. And I just want to leave you with one last set of numbers here. It's easy to be horrified when you think of how many people voted for Trump, how many tens of millions of people voted for Trump, 71 million. Here's the really hard math, again, quoting from one of these tweets. It's all sourced in the text. Here's the reality. Here's the really hard math for you MAGAs. There are 240 million eligible voters in the United States. 240 million eligible voters in the United States. There are 71 million that voted for Donald Trump. That's about 29% of the eligible voters in the United States. half would be 50%. 29% does not equal 50%. I hope it clears it up for you. I know numbers can be scary. We say this not only to the MAGA, but we say it to the CNN journalists and politico hacks and others in the mainstream media who will say, oh, well, the country's divided, or politicians who just repeat what they feel like the journalists will let them slide by with, oh, the country's split down the middle. No, it isn't. The country's split. About 70-30 country split. We're the 70. It's what Lando told Poe in that dire moment in the final trilogy of the most recent trilogy of Lord of the Rings. There are more of us than them. But you have to vote. And in this election, you have to vote Democrat, and you have to vote all the way up and down the ballot. You have to vote for the election officials and the school board officials. You have to vote. You have to bring your friends. You have to get your friends to vote. You have to pull people out of their dreams, out of their fantasies, out of their ideological, their misguided ideological purity. You've got to get people to vote, because in their common sense, in their hearts, they're most people, the vast majority of Americans are for abortion rights. They're for gun control. They're for climate change action. They're for protecting the sanctity of the vote and protecting the rights of voting people. These are not things that the country is divided over. But the country in its inception, as we talked about in the first presentation, the country in its inception was kind of hardwired to protect minority rule, and they've done everything they can. They keep getting more and more desperate as the demographic shift continues in the body politic. They get more and more desperate because they can't win real elections anymore. So now they just want to throw away the elections completely. Well, the state legislature can throw away the ballots and decide who won the state, and we control the state legislature. So that's what we'll do now. This has to end here. I know you've been told, many of you have been told most of your life, this is the most important election of your life. Well, every time it wasn't a hyperbole. Every time it was true. But it's not that, we keep saying it over and over again because it doesn't get done. It's because it's a long arc. That's what Martin, the doctor, said. Dr. King said. He said the arc of the moral universe is long. That's what he meant. That's what he meant. That you would be here many times in your life, that this was the most important election of your life. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it ends towards justice, but occurs towards justice. We can do this. If we get through 2022 and we get through 2024, we will have broken the back. We will have broken the fever. We'll have routed the orcs. You can find this presentation on my Facebook page and also on wordsofpower.earth, wordsofpower.earth, all one word, wordsofpower.earth. You'll find links and full citations for everything quoted here and for all the images that are accompanying it in spirit of fair use. And I will speak to you again toward the end of October.